moves us on to item number 4.1 under the business section, open meeting law, code of conduct, and access to city attorney.
Having technical difficulties.
No, it's good.
Oh, it is good?
It's good.
Okay.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
So these are items that we've had on the agenda to discuss, and we decided to do move forward with a special council meeting. So regarding these issues on the agenda.
My computer's going through a restart, but I did want to ask you, Chris, I know it was mentioned that the attorney works for the city of Pine City, so I'm working for kind of a legal clarification on the definition of the city of the Pine City. For opinion.
It's the council as a whole.
And so any direction to the attorney goes through the city administrator, correct? Or so the council would give authorization to the city administrator to provide approval for discussion points, correct?
Yes, you
For
could.
the most part, yes. And the only reason why I say for the most part is through the contract with Flaherty and HUD, the city administrator is like the designated point of contact from both sides. So in the event that we need to communicate, typically the city administrator is the mouthpiece for that.
Okay. But in general, the direction would come from the council for whatever topic went to the city attorney, correct? It wouldn't just be that one council member could come up with or a city administrator could come up with a topic to go to the city administrator without acknowledgement or approval from the rest of the council, correct?
Oh, well, there's things that I have to go bring to for legal review that I don't bring to council for that though.
There's also the city code. There's other instruments that give authority. But for the most part, I would say that what you're saying is accurate. But ultimately, the city administrator has a role with authority designated from the city code. The city council has the same. For the most part, the city council controls, they're the parties to the contract and they're the client. So I don't know much about, the subject matter that is going to be discussed. I know it was noticed and I have a general idea, but I think that it's a good idea to have these discussions so we can talk candidly and maybe clear up, any questions anyone has.
I think I might have more questions, but I want to let the rest of the council ask questions if they have questions when my questions develop, if that makes sense. Are we starting at open meeting law and working our way through?
Yeah, and can we put a time limit on, not that I'm trying to stifle any information or information
We
sharing.
did discuss that, like keeping it at 2020 or.
Just keeping it, I don't want to be here for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
If we don't have to.
I won't
Yes.
make it.
Open meeting law question that I had, is we as a council decided to have open meeting law training for committees and commissions. And we've run into a ton of brick walls, it sounds like, just with expense and registering people. And my question is it time for us to potentially rethink and come up with a plan of how to rethink that, and maybe a train the trainer style session where either a member of staff or a member or two of council attends the open meeting law class and then is available to be the trainer, if you will, to the committees. And the reason I say that is most of the committees and commissions were not run by bylaws. They're not state regulated. It's just more about wanting to protect the people that are in these positions from potentially putting themselves in trouble. So how can we, I guess for me, I'm trying to be part of a solution of how we can execute this. Because I know everybody's super stupid busy, and I know that there's a lot of walls as far as cost and stuff. So is there a different way that we can think about executing the train the trainer style for getting the open meeting information to the committees?
Well, I mean, obviously, for you all, obviously you have me as a resource that if the council wants any legal guidance on anything specifically, I can provide that. I don't know if the league puts on trainings for open meeting law. They may. I would imagine that that's one of the cheaper options. Otherwise, we often put on trainings that I haven't personally done an open meeting law training, but we do provide that. Obviously, I know expense is a consideration, so I probably want to know a little bit more about like what the extent, maybe if we can narrow the issues to like what it is specifically that you want to ensure these committees are being brushed up on, just to make sure everyone is following the rules essentially. And then I could give you some options based off of my experience and my recommendation, but I guess I think that the general concept of, training these committees is a good idea. Especially if you have some concerns.
My concern is that everyone on our committees and commissions are volunteers and community volunteers. And there's just some pretty basic things in the open meeting law that I don't know that everybody grasps that can put themselves into harm's way, if you will, or put them into a situation where they could potentially be violating a policy and not even knowing. So that was more of just kind of a discussion point of how as a council or how I would want to think about moving that forward, because it's really important.
Could we even do something like a training for us that is like a recorded Teams meeting? And then if there was additional questions that could get funneled where it needed to be,
Right.
But just we go through an open meeting law training with either the league or with our attorneys here, and that gets recorded and then that gets broadcasted or gets sent out, for our committee members to follow and to buzz through a YouTube video or buzz through a video quick, and then if there's questions, then they can come back to us and we can compile a doc.
So the backstory to this is that we have like EDA, planning, HRA, our bylaw committees, and council requested that each of those members go through the training so they understand conflict of interest and when to vote, when not to vote, which has been an issue or a concern. And Melanie did a lot of research with the league's open meeting law program, but you have to have a city email, which then we'd have to go purchase all these emails for the committee members. So we've been trying to figure out is how do we.
I've created a slideshow. I just haven't I need to do a voiceover for the slideshow.
What is the cost of emails in the grand scheme of things?
Like $26 a month per user per year.
Yeah.
And by no means am I trying to sound ungrateful for the work that's been done. I know you guys have been, but it's just something that we've like how can we as council, or what can we do to help facilitate?
Well, at the commission and committee level, I would think that the council would have the ability to make it a requirement to be part of that commission or committee. At the council level, I don't think you can force elected officials to take the training if they decide that they don't want to take the official training. Like that was one of the things that we talked about in the code of conduct, that you can't force an elected official to do that. But the council, I would think, would be able to implement the policy that you're going to force everybody on the committee and the commission to take it and provide documentation. Otherwise, it can't be on the commission or the committee, in my opinion. Rather than to try and come up with the entire process or something, I would just say that we come up with a deadline that they have to go through that training and provide documentation by. And then it's completely on them and not on us to try and come up with a training policy.
I think right now we're having issues with access to that training catalog.
Because we had let the members know that if they take the course, we'd reimburse them. But problem is they can't even get onto the league to take the class unless they have the email address from the city. So
Well, the other thing is that the leagues is basically an interpretation of state statute, correct? Then could you just go on to chapter 412 and read through open meeting law, and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do?
I think there's even a one pager on the LMC site if I'm not that
Yeah, they
that's
have good. Oh,
the
sorry.
best way.
Yeah.
That's not that that's the best way for everybody to learn, but that's an option. Is you could say, here's a document, read it and acknowledge that you read it.
Sign it saying that you fully understand it, and if you get caught doing something wrong, you're in trouble. So,
Right.
it kind of seems like we're almost overthinking this one in some ways. If you sign a contract and you don't read the fine print, is that on you or is that on somebody else for not reading cover to cover kind of thing? What's your thoughts, Chris?
Sorry, the fine print contract comment that you just made.
Yeah, I mean, if they acknowledge that they understand everything for open meeting law because they either took the course and could provide certification, or they read Minnesota state statute and sign off on it, and they don't comply with open meeting law, is that on them or is that on the city?
Well, like for the remedies for violating open meeting law, because they're acting, in their capacity for the city could still be on the hook for any of the remedies, if that's what you're asking. Or are you asking like if you could take some sort of action in response to that?
Well, regardless of if they have the training or not, the city can still be on the hook. But if they
Yes.
sign up saying that they understand open meeting law and they're not going to violate open meeting law, and they do violate open meeting law, I would think that would give the city at least some ability to say, you signed off knowing that you know open meeting law, so we're going to hold you accountable.
Yeah, and open meeting law allows you, the open meeting law statute also provides remedies for people being personally liable, essentially, for certain violations. It goes to like the good faith of the city as well. Like, I mean, if you're taking the effort to ensure, I think the problem is like if you're just saying sign this that says without doing much to vet whether they know, I don't think it matters that much. That's more of a practical than a legal consideration, I would say, to be candid, but I think there's benefits in ensuring that the individuals that are performing work for the city, whether it be volunteer or not, ensure they have an understanding of the law, that's going to be implicated in the work or the activities that they're involved in. But I guess if they're signing a contract as far as you being able to hold them accountable, that's certainly the case.
Maybe when they fill out the application, they either have to read the state statute or show documentation that they went through the training and that they signed off that they understand what they're signing up for when they make that application.
Sure. I don't think it's twofold with the discussion you're having. I think that that's a good approach, but there's no harm in trying to find the cost efficient way to like update people, because obviously, at least from my experience, reading the statute once, it's not going to all stick, especially reading a statute as opposed to like a resource that's a little bit more straightforward for people aren't used to, interpreting statutes. But I mean, that's up to you all, what extent you want to invest in this, because obviously you want to mitigate concerns to the extent that you can, but some of it you just have to have a little bit of good faith that people are going to listen when they're told about things, and you ask them to learn about something they do. And so I don't know. There's no magical answer, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. It's really what you all want to do.
Well, I just pulled up the part of the handbook from LMC that contains open meeting law, and it's about a page and a half worth of information. I don't know if that's Yes, I would like a little bit more detail than that, but maybe that's.
They have a video on it too. I want to say it's under an hour, where if we take an entire meeting, get some business done, but play it during the meeting too. Log in under our own email and play it during.
I don't think there's any problem with playing it or paying for the session. Or if they just want to read the Cliff Note version, as long as they sign off on the fact that if they're going to take the shortcut and not understand the full details, they're kind of opening themselves up to liability. Would be my thought.
This for
Yeah,
all.
they could be.
Currently, it was for the committees that have bylaws. But I think with the goal of everyone in the committee understanding this eventually, this was.
Thank you.
Follow-up questions for open meeting law. That gives staff a good enough direction to help with something.
Yeah, whether it's a packet or playing the video. Yeah.
That answer, that make council happy, or
Yeah,
there's two good places, that there are starting points at least.
I just, again, I know there's been a ton of work done, just trying to see if there's anything that we can do to help, because I know there's been several Jersey barriers that we've hit along the way. If there's anything as a council or as legal can help, like I said, I feel it's important to help protect people that are on the commissions. That's the reason why I want to ask this question. And then would that eventually maybe look at asking those three committees and commissions to update their bylaws to have something that includes if there's new members that come on to those associate or committees or commissions, that they will be responsible for completing that training or as well.
Well, at least two of those committees require the council to sign off on approving their budget, correct? I mean, we could put it as contingent that they have to have the open meeting law as part of the approval of their budget, if we got that direction. The planning commission, I think we would have a different means just to say that we're gonna implement that.
And maybe even go, and this could be too far, but maybe even at the housekeeping or business keeping meeting, the organizational meeting of each one at the beginning of the year would be a good time to review with the entire committee if there's any changes to the open meeting law from that year to year.
Like last January, it changed from like remote meetings and be in a public place, yada yada yada, to then, well, you can join a council meeting in your house now, and that's totally fine. So that was a big shift from the legislature. So big changes do happen that change the way we do business. So I think having an update or a refresher, even if it's just a 30 seconds or a slip of paper with 3 bullet points on it that says these are the changes, then everybody is at least aware of them.
My only hesitancy is that if it's not put on by the league or presentation by the attorney in some slideshow, or the state statute, I always get nervous of interpretation of state statute because the league is really good, but at the end of the day, they will tell you that they're just interpreting state statute and they're not the actual law. So every time if internally city staff start interpreting the changes for state statute, does that leave us vulnerable for not interpreting correctly? So if it came directly from the state statute reading it or the League of Minnesota, I feel like our bases would be more covered, or the city attorney, than us developing it internally. Does that make sense?
It does. I would say so. I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar with a situation where something like that has happened and it's came back to bite a city, but I just don't know. But I think that from all other legal principles, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's a smart consideration realistically.
And I think a big picture here, at the end of the day, if we're talking about spending $15 per user, plus creating emails, plus doing all that kind of stuff, $200 to $450 to $500 is a drop in that bucket compared to signing a 3-year Microsoft contract to get everybody email accounts or something like that. So if we can do a one-time fee, we can create some documents, and maybe it just needs to be brushed up on every beginning of every year, then it can be kind of a rolling or a living document, if you will, where it's always updated and always the most up-to-date information.
That's 20 minutes.
Any other really quick follow-up on open meeting law before we move on to code of conduct? Perfect, and we can move on to code of conduct.
One thing that I wanted to talk about, when we were going through the initial approval of this, there was the City Council Commission's Code of Conduct and Council Bylaws one that we had discussed that had a couple pages of the actual Code of Conduct, and then it offered 13 pages of bylaws, if you will. And most of what the bylaws are is it breaks down what the open meeting law is, what different types of council meetings there are, you know, special meetings, emergency meetings, meetings, recess meetings, how to adjourn meetings, what motions voting mean, absence of presiding officer, decorum of council members, motions, language for making a motion, how to consider a motion, you know, objections to a motion, all the different types of motions that can be made. And I feel that I'm wondering if we want to consider making that an addendum. It was part of the conversation that we had before, but I feel since we procedurally don't follow a Robert's Rules of Order, and we don't really have a procedural way that our meetings work, as we're going into election here, and as things are, you know, seats may change, I feel it's very important to have that resource available to people who maybe haven't been in government jobs, who maybe haven't been part of procedural meetings or professional type. There's a lot, right? Like, been paying attention for quite a few years, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to try to remember. So
I can throw it out there and say I've worked in government, in the government sector for almost 20 years at this point in time. I was still drinking out of a fire hose when I came up. So I'm with you on that. That it's you can't just pick up a book of Robert's Rules of Order and say, well, this is exactly how our meetings go. Not how our meetings. It's sort of how our meetings can go, but not all spelled out 100% from point A to point B, which can be good and it can be bad depending on the situation.
but I know, at least when before I was elected, I thought I understood, and then when you get elected and you sit up here, there's a lot that you have to try to figure out, and having a resource like this would have been very beneficial, is what I'm saying. And I think that it could be beneficial in transparency and moving forward, helping people set people up for success that are in this.
One thing, if I may, I actually am aware of a pretty good resource for what you're talking about. And not to be an unintentional LMC plug here, but they do have a resource called A Good Start to Good Governance. I actually have it up right here. Guidance for newly elected city officials from the League of Minnesota Cities. And it's essentially what you're talking about, just general high level, general principles that are going to apply to no matter where you are. Obviously, every city has their own specific, you know, city code, maybe city charter, codes of conduct, that sort of thing. But it's a solid resource, I would say. and I'd recommend taking a peek because that may be, you know, kind of along the lines of what you're looking at, and it's free. But I just thought I'd bring that up since we're talking about it.
I guess because they do have the council member handbook and the mayor's handbook as well from the LMC, but that's again more of a high level.
Yep.
One size fits all.
Like I said, I used this because it wasn't that old, and the city spent a lot of money to have somebody put together at some point. So it's put together, it reads well. And again, like I said, we had talked about it as we were going through the approval process. We're going to come back to it. And that's brought up for discussion.
Is that something that maybe we want to take a look at internally here after the big hurdles of budget kind of get done towards the end of the year? We can start looking at that and looking at finessing, kind of, for lack of a better term, maybe that document from the LMC, maybe some of that code of conduct from the previous code of conduct, and then just kind of merging that into one new fresh.
Well, like I said, the one that's here, the code of conduct is literally 2 pages long, and then the city council bylaws are page 4 to page 16, 17. Sorry. So most of it is it's about the mechanics of a meeting and the mechanics of council. But yeah, I think that sounds great.
Do you know if that was ever approved by council, the 2021? Because we couldn't find it in the minutes. I think Tabitha searched like crazy.
It was never approved.
But I know it, but if you look at the page, it says approved like August 9th.
Yeah, approved August 19th, 2021.
Yeah, but we can't
Yeah.
find the minutes that say it was approved. So
Which is why we had to go through and do
redo.
ours. But I was just using it as a reference, like I said, because it's already prepared, and I'm sure we put quite a bit of money to have somebody do it.
We can take a peek at that.
But I
here.
agree. I think there's really good information in that. But we just can't find that it was approved.
As little of reinventing the wheel as possible. What I was shooting for.
All right, are there any other questions or comments about code of conduct?
I know I mentioned it yesterday, but the code out says in it that the council is supposed to not try and inadvertently influence commissions or committees. And yesterday you had mentioned that a council member should be present in order to steer or guide in the principles of what the council wants. I wonder if that, again, is a conflict of the code of conduct, if we're steering their thoughts or processes in a different direction. So I still have concerns with council members on the committees. I know the 3 in general are supposed to have a council member present, but I also know that at least 2 of them can be designated as the council themselves. And I am trying to get rid of another one, or hope that it goes to a different organization. But I think that those provide options to not have a conflict where the council is steering those committees. On another note, I know that there's been a lot of meetings, almost impromptu meetings. And the sewer meeting this morning, I think, is a good one. That until I asked about it yesterday, I didn't know anything about it. And part of the code is that the rest of the council is supposed to be notified of any time that the council is meeting with those individuals, either beforehand if it's known, or if it's not known, if it's just so last minute that it's updated afterwards.
Correct. For this meeting though, this was not council involvement whatsoever. Dave Hill and Mr. Hill and Mr. Swanson did come. However, this was a meeting that was arranged with Public Works and myself and Ellers to go over the fee schedule. This wasn't council involvement, therefore I don't believe I was required to have you involved with this.
And was the meeting noticed as a quorum?
Because council wasn't invited.
But in the event that more than just the 2 council members showed up, it would have been an open meeting violation, correct?
Well, it was a discussional there, so it can be a little gray because there were decisions being made. It was discussion. Ellers presented. I opened the meeting. They had the microphones. Ellers presented, and then they were allowed to ask questions. So there was no decision making. There was nothing to vote on. It was informational and not council directed.
But I guess, Chris, if the 3 council members had shown up and started talking about the subject at hand, would that have been a possible open meeting violation without it being noticed?
Possibly.
And I can say, like, I think, I don't remember what meeting it was, but I think Mr. Hill and I were both filling in for somebody, and we both showed up, and I think we kind of just rock, paper, scissors it and said, okay, which one of us is going to leave?
Mhm.
That's what would have happened. In the entryway, and it ended up not being an issue, if I remember correctly, but had someone else appeared, one of us would have just stepped out of it. And maybe that needs to be written down or written as a guideline. But I think that kind of falls underneath open meeting law itself too, so.
Mhm.
Basically,
Quick question, would it be possible for you guys, if it's strictly an informational meeting, just to sit not next to each other and just listen and hear without discussing anything though?
I think there's and I'm gonna speak freely here and say, I think there is a conception from the residents of the city that if 3 council members are even having coffee in the morning and not discussing anything city related, that is a violation of open meeting law. So at least in my experience, that's
Yeah.
kind of just even bumping into each other in public places. You kind of, I've bumped into past council members at the brewery in town, and we all just kind of picked different places to sit, so no one could say, well, they were discussing city business with each other. So that's, I think, kind of the thought process of, I think it's happened to all of us. Even if it's not happening, I think the appearance that it could be happening is a valid appearance.
What is the time frame needed to notice for a possible open or a public forum?
3 days.
The meeting was impromptu last minute, or was it known before?
The sewer?
Yeah.
Oh, the sewer has been,
This discussion,
Yeah.
sorry,
oh, wait.
or this meeting this
Meeting.
morning.
Yeah, that was not last minute. This meeting for the sewer discussion today took about a month to put in place to get everything coordinated with Ellers, the 3 sewer districts. But again, council wasn't involved in this. It was a meeting that I organized with them. So
I guess just a thought is that either we should notice it as a possible quorum, just to cover our bases, or we should just told all council members in general not to attend, just to avoid any kind of potential conflict. Would be my thoughts. We've all talked about perceived power with the council and having authority, but anytime we place ourselves in those positions, all of a sudden we open up possible open meeting violations.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that we cover all of our bases? And I'm not saying this to point fingers and call people out, but how do we avoid this? So,
yeah.
because we're all passionate, we all want to attend, we all want to listen in, but how do we make sure that we're not getting in trouble?
And I want to speak real quick that this is probably the first time this has happened. This meeting was organized without council involvement, but we have, as staff, noticed quorums so many times where there was actually no council present. So I think that staff has done a great job of making sure, oh, there could be council. So we do already do that. This was something that I wasn't expecting council involvement at all.
It
So
was more of a staff
Yeah.
level business.
yeah, we organized this with Ellers, and I spoke directly with the townships, and Lisa and I organized this. So there was never any intent for council to be there.
And I 100% understand that, but it doesn't eliminate the risk. if a third council member had showed up or wanted to stay or had a rock, paper, scissors, this council is pretty good at working together, but are all future councils going to want to abstain from those interactions?
I guess I remember there was we could also take the route of, when we were at the league training, there was one city administrator that said, I just post every meeting as a quorum. So I think that limits the council members that are on the committee from speaking in the committee. But it would then allow a full quorum of council to be present.
Mhm. But again, I just want to point out that 99% of the time, we do have everything covered for posting for a quorum. This was not today because I had no intention of council attending, so.
I just want to make sure that it doesn't keep happening again for that 0.1%. So like the mayor said, is if we just notice every meeting as a possible quorum,
But it wasn't even a noticed meeting though.
but then we should probably tell the council that they can't show up in any capacity, regardless if they're silent or not. You're still coming through as perceived power of authority. And that was the argument, is that in the elected position,
Mhm.
whether you had to have a council member on at the time or regular citizen, you still have ultimate authority in a meeting situation. Either we got to communicate that no council members should be attending, and definitely not speaking, or we should just notice them all as open possible quorums so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. And that in the event that somebody does speak, whether it's their own opinion or they use any kind of language saying we or the city or the council, that could be perceived as throwing around weight. I would think a good attorney will pretty much argue anything, right, Chris?
That's right.
And I will say that it seems like I have seen in the past that Marcy does notice, I think, things like public events where two council members have been present that are not city related events, but you have done a very good job. Like I've done things with Pine Tech, or I've done things with the chamber, and
Mhm.
you'll notice it just
It's something we're very conscious of. Yeah.
belt and suspenders.
I think when we learn about those meetings, either if we can't still notice them as an open meeting, I think we just have to have the discussion with the council that you can't attend, or you shouldn't attend because we're opening ourselves up to things. And if it's all informational, in some respects, it might be a better conversation if it is just staff and not the council, because the council all has their own opinions too. So
Right.
that's like bringing a match to a bucket of gasoline in some respects.
So maybe what you're saying there, like using just today as an instance, if today was a staff level organized meeting, is that a proper way to call it? That would be considered a staff level organized meeting?
I mean, I guess I never put a label to it
Yeah.
because
But maybe if it's one of those that council doesn't attend staff level organized meetings without council approval, or
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't know, it's just.
Because if
Just
you,
a
I mean, I think staff can testify, my life is pretty much a meeting. So, there's no way I can notify you of every meeting. If Brock and I go to a pickleball meeting, and I mean, a lot of these are last minute too. So, I mean, our lives are meetings.
And that's kind of the point, is that you guys have to be able to function. And ultimately, if you guys make a decision on something, I'm guessing that you're going to be rolling that back to council unless it
We
falls
make no decisions. Yep.
somewhere in that policy. So having the council at every single meeting, I know, makes a lot of sense.
No.
And in some cases, council just needs to step back and let staff do the thing, in my opinion.
I think pickleball is a good example. We've met with them so many times. We were trying to get this MOU. Why would we involve you in all of this daily back and forth with their attorney, our review, our attorney's review, and then ultimately it's coming to you for a final decision. So we're doing the legwork so you guys can make the decisions and be knowledgeable of what's going on and informed. That's my goal, is that you guys stay informed.
I'm on board with going to less meetings, just so
Yeah,
we're on the same page. So,
Me too.
Well, this whole thing, with what happened today started because of me. Because they called me and they asked me to ask staff to set it up. I mean, that was how this whole thing started.
Not really, we've been.
Not, I'm talking about the original. The original.
No, we've been in communication with okay.
Well, one of the
Okay.
Patagonia board members that came
So,
to me and asked.
I
me-
mean, this wheel's been rolling since, March or April, so.
I guess if you're gonna make that argument, the code also says that any requests like that are supposed to be referred to the city administrator.
They were.
And
were.
If it's not getting done, then you can get involved, but
I didn't get involved. I referred it. The township officer asked me to intervene and to get a meeting going, get it back on, get the thing rolling. I said, I'll contact the city administrator and we'll get some meetings set up. We had a meeting at that time out at Public Works.
so did you give the city administrator an order to set up a meeting?
No,
No, this was back like when the.
I gave him I gave her his contact information. That's what he asked for. Can I get her contact information? I sure can. I'll give it to you. I mean, you can look it up on the internet if you wanted to.
But we'd already been in discussion one.
Well, you were in discussion before, yes, but I'm just saying it started back up because we were kind of at a stalemate. I think the whole thing was at a stalemate. And I just passed it along and she put it together. I didn't put nothing together.
We're coming up here on 20 minutes on code of conduct here. Any final thoughts or any other questions before we move on to access to the city attorney?
Well, I want to say one thing. If I feel I would go and go to a meeting, guys, I'm 72 years old almost, I'm going to the meeting. And if I think I can do good by just listening, I'll listen. If I think I can be good by making a comment with a disclaimer saying I'm speaking as a citizen or a council member, not speaking for the council. And I've done that today even. I said when I made a statement, I said I am speaking for myself, not for the council. I made that very clear. I think the staff here that was here heard me. And if I feel I'm going to do that, I can tell you guys I've been in government long enough. I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't go out of my way, try to make trouble, and I don't try to go out of my way. My whole purpose of being at these, because I think I'm a calming person, and I think I'm a person that can get along with just about anybody. And if I think I can benefit the situation, I'm going to do it.
Guess I don't disagree that you were trying to help, Dave, but I guess my only thought process there was that an open meeting to the general public? Could my neighbor
It
have shown
was-
up?
I mean, truly, if
We
anyone
had
walked
no
through the door,
door lock.
no door was locked, but, it wasn't noticed. It was set up through the 3 sewer districts only, through
So-
their townships.
The mayor's point, if it's not open to the public, and you're saying that you showed up as a person, as a public individual, and you got access to the meeting, but that meeting wasn't open to everybody else, that seems like a conflict. That seems like you used council authority.
Who
to-
says it wasn't open?
Well, because it wasn't noted anywhere. So I
Well-
can see, like, hindsight, maybe this should have been a noticed meeting because we did have 3 townships involved. I
So-
could see that.
Chris, do you have any guidance that might clear us up or point us on the straight and narrow here?
As a general rule of thumb, I view city council as getting together for authorized meetings where you're setting them up for city council and staff meetings being set up for staff. I missed the beginning where I think the actual crux of what the meeting was about was discussed. So it's a little difficult to say, but for the most part, it sounds like this was a staff meeting that a council member showed up to, which, I mean, it's not technically impermissible. It does kind of start to muddy the water of like, where's the line that you draw? Is it at quorum? Because if it's at quorum, then that's going to cause a lot more issues. But generally, city council attends city council meetings. if they're appointed to certain committees by the council, they attend those committee meetings. Other than that, I mean, the council is permitted to make inquiries and request information. So it's really, do we need to actually show up to these meetings? I probably wouldn't recommend it. Is it outright wrong? Probably not either. But it does run risks of, where do you draw a line? So.
I think one of the reasons I felt I needed to be there, I'm also on Public Works. I'm not the chairman of Public Works, but I'm on Public Works. And I think this is a big piece of Public Works.
The code kind of outlines committees, and Public Works is a committee, but this is a separate meeting outside of the normal committee meeting. And the council didn't authorize council members to be present for this discussion. And is this a discussion? Is this a subcommittee? Is this a staff meeting? And we have the code. If we're going to follow the code, we should follow the code. If we start coming up with gray areas that we're going to find so that we can exploit them for us to go in and be part of those meetings, I mean, what's the point of having the code at that point? So I guess after hearing your side, I still have concerns because it seems like we used authority as an elected official to get into this meeting so that we could participate as our own citizenship that wasn't open to all citizens of Pine City. And that seems wrong to me. And it seems like it's in violation of the code.
So Councilmember Hill, what were you saying about you being on Public Works? Because that obviously changes it.
I used to be the chairman of Public Works, but we changed all that. I am not Public Works chairman anymore as of last month. And so I am on the Public Works committee.
So the purpose of this meeting this morning that we spent about a month planning was we have 3 sewer districts who use our sewer facility. And they have contracts with us for that usage. And they're supposed to be reviewed every year. And they have not had a review or a rate increase in over 10 years. So we've done a rate study with our financial contracted service, Ellers, and which indicated, as we knew it would, that they are deeply underpaying for their sewer services that we're providing. So there's been a little bit of it's been a little heated, and we've been trying to work with them. And so we scheduled this meeting with Ellers to present to the 3 sewer districts, and then have any questions they had, they could ask Ellers directly. And then Lisa and I wouldn't be going in between and maybe misstating or misquoting Ellers' study. So the intentions were great for them to see how they came up with this new calculation. So that was the intent of this meeting today.
I think
There is a sewer committee in addition to the Public Works.
No, but
No,
we
there
just
ain't.
talked about that today, how we should have
there
something like that.
There used to be
They
a
said about 10,
representative from the city that would participate in the district.
oh, I go to those meetings.
Yeah.
But
That's only one district.
That's only one. Cross Lake is the one that's what.
Hindsight's 2020, but maybe this should have been a work group similar to the 315 work group project, where that work group kind of steered council so had the end decision. But if we wanted representation present, then it could have been inviting everybody from every aspect to have these conversations. But
Yeah.
that also seems like a lot of work to
And
set up
what
a work group for a staff meeting.
was the entirety of the Public Works Committee invited to this meeting?
Public Works Director, Lisa, myself, and then 2 people from Ellers who helped with the study. So.
Yeah.
And it was just basically to have them have a chance to, they didn't feel included in all of this, which I still don't think they really needed to be, because we have a formula in a contract that everyone agreed upon. So there really shouldn't be any negotiations. There shouldn't be any participation except for giving the information and doing the calculation.
No, I know we're deep diving, but we're making arguments, again, because of the committees that we sit on, but, and operating as a capacity of a citizen, but not all of the citizens in Pine City knew of the meeting or were invited, and
The
not all
people,
of,
yeah, just the people involved with it.
and not all of Public Works, so, again, I have concerns that we're just using our ability as council members to participate in
Yeah,
committee meetings, which again goes back to the fact I don't like council members on committee meetings because I think it opens up the grounds for us to kind of steer the public in a direction that we want to go.
because you come into a meeting with a level of authority, regardless whether you're 4 or 1. You're seen as a authoritative person. So, yeah.
Chris, you have a.
Well, I just think the
I did-
default council sets, the parameters of what you all can do. So if you're assigning people to specific committees that are meeting, that makes sense. But like you said, just showing up because of interest in the subject matter is not recommended. Because then you run the risk, someone's going to say, well, this council member said this to me, and it could be construed as direction or whatever it may be, which is a concern as well. But this is why it's good to have these conversations so you can talk openly about it and figure out what the best way to proceed is. And if you need to designate authority to an individual who on the council, you certainly can do that. And if you feel that it's something that should be brought to council as a whole, then you can do that as well. I mean, ultimately, it likely would be either way, but
Because just like when we have a
safer to work.
pickleball, yeah, if we have a pickleball meeting, we don't invite Parks and Rec to come to that meeting because we haven't. So,
You just want to keep all the pickles to yourself, is that what you're saying?
Sorry to cut you out, Mr. Swanson.
Just one last thing that if it makes it today or tomorrow, but around the communication part of the code of conduct, I think that we need to insert language around purpose of inquiry phone calls and other phone calls from staff to council that are allowed by law, to expand on that. Copy of the city administrator and all communications with staff, including questions, because I do believe there are two different things that are called out by law: purpose of inquiry phone calls, and that if a staff member has a concern with their direct supervisor, they're supposed to be able to reach out to any council member without having to copy someone. I feel that it's important for us to discuss and maybe consider altering that language.
That sounds like a legal question for Chris.
Yeah, let me get to that section. So you're talking about adding clarifying language to distinguish, purpose of inquiry versus, what could be construed as direction. And then also in what instances you would keep the city administrator on communications.
It's my understanding that part of the law says that if there's a member of city staff that has an issue with their direct supervisor, they're supposed to be able to reach out to any council member or the mayor to openly share that information. And the way that our code of conduct reads now, that communication would have to be, the city administrator would have to be CC'd in that communication. So I'm just wondering if we need to clarify that for those two lawfully allowed phone conversation times, or that's, but the clarification.
So are we talking about the city administrator as the supervisor, or you're saying that they should be able to serve the administrator to talk to council about their supervisor?
That any member of staff, if they have an issue with their supervisor, they should be able to reach out to council or any member of council or any member of staff to share the concern.
And did you say that was like a policy somewhere?
That's my understanding, that that's part of the law.
What law is that?
I don't have
Because, as city council, you designated the city administrator as, the head of the administrative branch, if you will. They're the ones that are responsible for the actual city personnel operations. They are responsible to you all, but I think that there is a defined, level or hierarchy of authority, and there's practical and legal reasons why that would be. I don't think. Are you talking about Minnesota statute 412.661? Does that sound right?
Then the 412s. I thought I had that notebook with me, but I didn't.
It's limit on council powers. I can share my screen.
And again, if tonight's not the night, but again, I just think it's something that needs to be clarified and needs to be maybe broke out. That was clarified.
Sure. So do you want to talk about this, or?
I'm assuming that the next portion is going to take less than 20 minutes, so we can go a little bit long on this. I don't think I can see an issue with that. So we can clear the air and get it, or at least get to a point where we can decide to add it or not add it to our code of conduct rewrite, or would be mine.
So I guess with the state statute, if a staff member has a problem with a supervisor and it comes down to a whistleblower situation, hypothetical corruption, harassment, embezzlement, or whatever, would they have the right to go to council with that information if they had concerns? Would they go to the city administrator, or would they go to the state of Minnesota?
It's going to depend on your policy, because in statute, it doesn't provide for that right, if that's what you're asking. I believe what Councilmember Swanson is referring to is the purpose of inquiry, as far as how council can deal with individual staff. And, purpose of inquiry is the role of council to remain informed of matters that are within their authority, so they can reach out, ask questions, ask for information, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering if it's almost being construed as the purpose of inquiry is mutual ways, so they can, it wouldn't really be a purpose of inquiry in the event that an employee was providing information because of concerns about their supervisor, which is why you have the structural hierarchy that you do have. And I'd imagine that in policy that it says that if you have an issue, you should talk to your direct supervisor, and if you have an issue that involves your direct supervisor, you take it to the city administrator. Because again, the city administrator is the personnel officer, I guess you could say. But in the event that the issue is with the city administrator, then that would be a situation where you would go to council, or I believe may even say city attorney in policy.
I was gonna say, I've
Yeah.
been in this before, where it's been the city administrator. And I've gone to council. It was not in any policy or anything. And the way they had it structured, and it probably still is, it made it to the point where I was wondering if I would still have a job because I went above the city administrator. So I do think this is something that we should address, because we do need to have some place to go just in case that is the case.
I feel like this was handshake.
So I think we're talking about two different things. We're talking about just employees generally being able to go to the city council for things versus employees being able to go to council above the city administrator. And the latter makes sense because the council is the city administrator's supervisor as a whole. The council is. But I thought initially we were talking about just generally staff being able to bring concerns to the council directly.
I'm sorry, that's not what I was trying to say. My words didn't work. It was more if there was purpose of inquiry being one, and two, if there was an issue with a staff member where the city administrator might be that right now, the way that our code of conduct reads, that the staff would have to CC the city administrator on the communication with the council if the city administrator was potentially the one that the staff member had the issue. So that, again, just clarifying.
I feel like maybe that was an unwritten rule, but I remember somebody at some point in time told me that if there is an issue, there is no issues coming to any council member with the employee's concerns. Now, maybe that was a handshake agreement, or this is the way we've always done the thing, but it's never been typed down on a piece of paper. I think that's an easy add. Yeah, Jason.
So let's say I had a couple concerns that I was hoping to say tonight. Because this is an open council meeting, would I have the opportunity to express some to you guys, or is that something I should go through Marcy and tell?
Does it relate to the subject matter of the special meeting?
I believe my interpretation would think it would be under a code of conduct, but
Council Palmer is right to be, skeptical. We are in a special meeting. We're limited in scope here, so just keep that in mind.
So I guess if it would fall under the policy of code of conduct, since we're talking about code of conduct, we could probably address the matter I think the other challenge is if it comes down to, this might be a special council meeting required, if it's talking about specific staff members, if any actions would have to be addressed, I would believe. So I guess maybe we can voice it, but you might also open up a can of worms of trouble. And maybe if there is a concern with a staff member, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but maybe that should be handled in a closed session to discuss, and then if any actions needed be taken place in an open. Is that?
Yes, that's unrelated to special meeting. Even at a regular meeting, you don't want to be talking about private personnel data in an open meeting unless it's absolutely necessary.
it wouldn't be pointing anybody out as potential blanket observations. So, and it's just a question. I'm not necessarily asking for a time to express these things. It was, well, if one of us did have something of concern, I'm new to this, I'm learning right now. I'm just trying to figure out the proper steps.
I don't
And
think
it seems like a good time to ask.
any problem with a staff member ever requesting a closed session to have a conversation with council. Is there, based off of performance? Chris, or?
And there's going to be policy mechanisms that you'd have to follow. If we're talking about city staff bringing concerns up, likely that's going to needs to go to the proper party, who ultimately, eventually will get that up to city council if it so warrants it. So like, for example, if you are in that process trying to get it escalated and you don't feel that, for example, the city administrator is taking it seriously, I don't have the policy in front of me, so don't quote me on this, but oftentimes in that situation, the policy would likely say, then you can escalate it to council or request that it's escalated to council. But I don't know what the city's policy is. Right now, we're not necessarily talking in terms of what statutorily is required. We're talking a bit about what are the city's processes for handling situations, which is, from my interpretation, we're getting a little bit away from the code of conduct, because the code of conduct is the conduct that governs the city council and their relationships with staff, which I could see how it's tied to it, but I don't know if this is necessarily what we are talking. I'm afraid the conversation is going to start trending towards getting outside of the scope of the special meeting, but.
Okay, so the question was on inquiries for clarification.
Yeah, just the purpose of inquiry, and then, again, if a staff member needs to report to a council member that surpasses the CA, I just feel as part of the code of conduct that needs to be clarified in there. Just spelled out that, whatever statute it relates to or whatever the case may be, but these are occasions where So, yeah, I don't know if I'm being clear, bro.
I think I'm understanding, and I think we add this to the stack for when we look at the code of conduct. That's a bullet point that we get added in there, and then we can put that both
Like-
from there.
I think we can talk about it more in November because we're required to talk about this in November for the code of conduct,
All right, are there any other code of conduct questions while we are still here? Then we will move on to access to the city attorney.
He's right here.
You just gotta call me. And do it next week. Yeah. So it's my understanding that, you know, the city council may have received some direction from the city attorney on this. I deal a lot in the code of conduct, which is why I'm here. But the one thing that I will say that aside from, I don't know to the extent what it says in city code, but I do know that the contract between Flaherty and HUD and the city essentially says that the city council is the client, but the contract also designates the city administrator as essentially the liaison between the two, which we talked a little bit about. And I think that probably I think what the question was is initially, this may have been raised even earlier, was like, does everything have to be off? Like, does council have to say city administrator contact the attorney for this? And the answer would be no, because the city administrator bestowed certain authority on the city administrator to manage, like, for example, sensitive personnel matters, their personnel head of the city, like the administrative head. And in the contract, I'll just read it to you instead of just trying to talk in figuratives. Essentially, it says the firm will provide legal services to the city upon request of the city council or the city administrator or the city council's or city administrator's designated representative. So essentially, as far as eliciting legal services, depending on the scope, which isn't defined necessarily in the contract, both the city administrator and the city council have the authority to request legal services. And I think that where it gets confusing is, you know, really boils down to, so what authority does an individual council member have? And that basically just depends on what the council is designated. As a baseline default, an individual city council member does not have authority to request legal services. However, you know, that's something that you would just take to council. Or depending on the situation, maybe even take to the city administrator. I don't know what circumstances those would be, but that's typically the way that it works. I mean, I work for a lot of cities, I work for a lot of counties and other various municipal entities, and this is the arrangement with all of them. So that's the primer. Do we have any more specific questions about, you know, because like, for example, like if I receive a question of clarification from a city council member, you know, most of the time, depending on what it is, like I'm likely able to provide that information, but it's a best practice to provide that information to the council as a whole, if that makes sense, because the council as a whole, the city is the client essentially. So you run the risk of when you're, you know, going back and forth with individual council members that technically it's outside of what's authorized by the city council.
So at the council level, anything, I mean, the city administrator can't just use the attorney to try and circumvent votes of the council, investigate the council, or provide any kind of approval to take action on council level matters without directive from the council, correct? The council would have to provide at least the quorum or the majority vote would have to provide approval of that use of the attorney at the council level, correct? If it's outside of clarification that the council is asking for clarification on a legal matter.
Yeah, yes. I mean, obviously you all designated the city administrator to have certain authority. So because they're the ones that are managing the personnel, oftentimes that requires them to ask questions to legal for the benefit of the city. Which is typically the scenario where you maybe aren't necessarily at the front end aware until it ultimately comes to the council. But as a matter of best practice, the recommendation is always to provide an update so that you all are aware of what's going on. At which point, if further discussion needs to be had, it could be had. But to your question, no, our city administrator, not she, our city administrator could not use legal counsel to circumvent city council decisions or to, implement things that are not within our authority.
Do you have recommendations on how to notify council on personnel issues?
Well, that's the issue. So as far as personnel issues, that's the biggest, tension point between the relationship between administration and, the actual governance, which is you all at city council, is under the Data Practices Act. Like, as council, you don't just inherently have access to personnel data unless it's authorized by the council as a whole, for one. But also just generally, unless something's being put before you to, consider, it doesn't automatically give you access to personnel data. But in the event that you're made aware of information, you can request as a council, like, personnel information. So it really just depends on what the nature of the action is. Like, one, you don't want to necessarily have to spend all the time and energy and attorney fees essentially to provide remedial updates on everything that's going on in the event that they're even getting us involved anyway. But it's really striking a balance. I guess the recommendation would be, if there are things like pressure points or things that council feels like they're in the dark about, when they want to be more in the know of, that they're not currently now, I think we could talk about that generally, and we can kind of gauge whether that's something that's fair or could change. Like, one thing that we do for some cities is we create, like, in connection with our billing, we create like billing summaries. Like, this is a general what we've worked on without disclosing private personnel data. Like, that's one way, but obviously it takes time to do that. The other way is, oftentimes city administrators just rely on us to know when this is something that we need to bring before the council, even if they're not necessarily going to act on it now. Get them in the know now, so that in the event that it becomes something that they're going to have to act on, they're at least aware, and it's not just put on their plate when the decision needs to be made. That makes sense.
But I think our code of conduct does outline that if a council member is perceived to overstep the bounds, the rest of the council is supposed to address that in a meeting. Is essentially correct.
That would make sense. I mean, you are the supervisors of each other as well. I mean, even without the code of conduct, but
I mean, to address that, it should be done at the level of council, right?
Yeah.
Not,
Yep. So should there be concerns, the complaint would be brought to council to review as a group.
If there was gently a complaint against council or made by council, that would be brought to the group ultimately.
so in conclusion, we just gotta get in a room and yell at each other.
Did you need can you clarify that last sentence, Chris? You got a little muddled there.
Sorry?
Can you repeat that last statement that you made? You got a little.
Yes. If there is a complaint brought against council, which would be pursuant to the code of conduct policy, or a complaint brought from council against, someone from the city or whoever it may be, that would ultimately be brought before the council. Council is not going to be the ones who are the fact finders, but ultimately the complaint and the information to be assessed and basically determine any course of action that's always going to be brought to the council.
Is that open meeting or closed?
I'm proud of the open.
It depends, actually.
It's weird.
So. Oh, actually, I think there is always the opportunity to close it under preliminary allegations against an individual who council has authority over. You have authority over individual council members, you have authority over staff. So each direction, there's the opportunity to close it. Whoever would be the subject of a complaint, they're going to have the opportunity to request that it's open, but they don't have to. But that's essentially what it is. And most of the times how that's addressed is information is gathered, it's brought to council in the closed meeting, and the council decides how they want to proceed. And then that may include further meetings, that may include nothing, that may include hiring neutral parties, that sort of thing.
Arbitration.
You don't want to go that route just because how expensive it is, but in theory, I guess you could.
You don't know the last administrator we had. He didn't care.
I think my question's answered for the short term.
I think so.
Are there any other questions for the attorney? Perfect. Thank you, Chris, for being here. I then at this point would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Dan, second by Kyle. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Okay.
We only overdid it by 17.
Wasn't too bad.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.